Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Brev. Welcome to another MLB The Show 21 video. Today I'm going to be going over basically all the tips I can think of in regards to lineup construction and how to use your bench most effectively. This stuff can get pretty intricate at times, and I've seen a lot of people doing things a little bit slightly wrong, so hopefully this video will help you out and help you make the lineup you're already using the most efficient it can be. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. And also, as a quick disclaimer in the beginning, the point of this video isn't to tell you which cards to use. The point is to give my best advice on how the cards you're already using should be best ordered in your lineup to make them most effective. Now, I did make this tweet about a week ago asking for people to submit their lineup and bench for a lineup construction and bench video, and we had a ton of responses on that. So later on in the video, we will actually be looking at other people's lineups and benches, and I will be giving my best advice on how to reorder things. Again, especially when we're looking at other people's teams, I'm not going to be suggesting new cards to be using at all. I'm just going to be talking about how to use the cards you already have most efficiently. So to start off, I want to talk about some basic principles that I apply when constructing my lineups. This is pretty close to a God Squad for me at the moment. There's several positions that could be switched around, several cards that could be switched around, but this is basically the bare bones of where we're going to start. So leading off, let's talk about the leadoff spot. As you can see in this team that I'm running, I actually have Mike Trout hitting leadoff. Historical and traditional baseball knowledge would tell you that you want speed at the top of your lineup. However, things are slightly different in Diamond Dynasty because we have a God Squad player at basically every position. So when constructing your lineup, in terms of the leadoff spot, I actually prioritize power over anything else. If they have both power and speed, that is a plus. That's why I usually have Trout sitting near the top of the lineup. Some may look at a card like this Billy Hamilton or Kenny Lofton released earlier in the year and think that this is an ideal leadoff hitter. However, having a card like this in your leadoff spot leaves you open to a very vulnerable flaw. Because this is Diamond Dynasty and we can basically choose a God Squad player for every position, including our bench, it means our bench actually has some really valuable players that can come off in terms of pinch hitting. And I found very often that when you have a traditional leadoff hitter like someone like Kenny Lofton hitting leadoff, it does not do a good enough job of protecting your pinch hits later in the game. So let's say we're starting off the bottom of the 8th inning with our 8-hole hitter Trey Turner, and they bring in a right-handed pitcher, let's say 99 Gossage. You're down by 2 and Trey Turner works a leadoff walk, so now we got a runner on first with nobody out and a pinch hitter to come. You like to go to David Ortiz off the bench to face the right-handed pitcher, him being the tying run with massive power versus righties. This is big for you. However, instead of Trout hitting leadoff, you have 91 Billy Hamilton hitting leadoff, and so your opponent can pitch around David Ortiz, maybe even intentionally walk him and just pitch to Billy Hamilton instead, who is not nearly the caliber of hitter. Now, this is obviously an extreme example because there's not a ton of people running Billy Hamilton at all anymore, but I just wanted to stress how important I think it is to have a high caliber power hitter as your leadoff in this game, so that when you're trying to make leverage based decisions with your pinch hits late in the game, they don't just have a cop out to pitch around you. Alright, so that's tip number 1, power at leadoff, and if they also have speed, that's really good. You also may look at a card like Mike Trout and say, well, he doesn't have a ton of power versus lefties, why are you leading him off? I trust Trout tremendously just from using him throughout the years, and so I don't have a problem with him hitting lefties. Our bench decision also hedges this bet a little bit, which we'll get into later on. But if you're truly looking for like the most traditional leadoff hitter that also brings a bit of power to the plate, then Jackie Robinson is your guy. I think Jackie Robinson is one of the best choices in the game for just like a traditional standard leadoff hitter that also brings enough pop. However, for me personally, I just like having Trout there. Alright, tip number 2 is kind of a weird one because it depends on what cards you use, what cards you're good with, what time of the year it is, your strengths and weaknesses as a hitter at the plate in general. But traditionally, the most effective way to order a lineup would be to alternate righties and lefties. This is like the most basic form of lineup construction because it makes your opponent's decisions with their bullpen later on incredibly difficult. However, in this game, it's incredibly important to use cards that you're really good with, that you are comfortable with, and honestly, in my personal opinion, the need to have righty-lefty alternating all throughout the entire order isn't as necessary now that the 3-batter minimum is a thing for pitchers. Even if you go something like right-right-left, right-right-left, even if they bring in a right-handed pitcher for your first 2 right-handed batters, at least you still have that third at bat with a lefty before they can take their pitcher out. So me personally, in recent years, I've actually kind of strayed away a bit from right-left all the way down. This is where knowing yourself as a player is really important as well. I personally think my biggest weakness in the entire game as a hitter is trying to hit left on left. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it's so different than right on right, but it is for me. I would much rather hit right on right than left on left in this game, and so you can see that through a lot of my lineup constructions where I'm running a minimal amount of lefties and really only lefties that I trust a lot. Love Schwarber as a card, and he lets me sneak in my lefty bat at catcher while I can play around with a bunch of right-handed hitters at other positions. But in general, for me, I'm usually trying to run not that many left-handed hitters in my lineup, even if the pitching meta is right-handed heavy, which it is most of the time. You can also create pseudo lefties in your lineup with righties with reverse splits and with switch hitters who hit righties better. I am doing that twice in this lineup with Mike Trout and with 99 Future Stars Wander Franco. So if you think of Trout as a pseudo lefty, technically my lineup starts out as left, right, left with Chipper Jones hitting second. We will get into why I have Chipper Jones hitting second very shortly. And then you can see down in the 6th hole, I'm also using Wander Franco as a bit of a lefty to break up all the right-handed bats towards the bottom of the order. So this lineup only has one left-handed hitter, but we can use a couple of pseudo lefties to kind of break things up. So it's not as bad for us if our opponent is throwing a right-handed pitcher. Again, a lot of this stuff is very intricate and very personal to you. I'm just trying to give out my best advice and tips to help you guys formulate your own lineups for yourselves. And so that was tip number 2. Try to alternate righty-lefty as much as you can, but in general, just use the cards that you're good with and make sure you're breaking up at least the attributes of your cards somewhat throughout your lineup. All right, tip number 3 is a big one. This is one I see very few people doing actually. I think it's a really small thing, but it helps a ton, and that is recognizing which hitters in your lineup have the most drastic splits and going out of your way to protect those cards. And so this is exactly why we have Chipper Jones hitting second in the lineup. If you look at how we've constructed this lineup and in general just every single card that you see on screen, you can immediately tell that in terms of hitting attributes, our two biggest weaknesses in the lineup are both Trout and Schwarber hitting against a lefty. And so by sandwiching Chipper Jones in between them, who is completely maxed out versus lefties, it helps protect both of them much more than if we use somebody else. We could have Jackie hitting second to have more speed at the top of the lineup, but that is not nearly as good because the prospect of throwing a left-handed pitcher against Trout, Robinson, and Schwarber is incredibly less terrifying than trying to throw a left-handed pitcher at a lineup of Trout, Jones, and Schwarber. This is also why we have Castellanos hitting fourth behind Schwarber, and in terms of splits, Schwarber is sandwiched between our two best hitters versus left-handed pitching. Now, not all of the players in your lineup are going to need this sort of protection, so it's important to structure your lineup to help those who do. For example, Chipper Jones obviously hits righties worse, but he doesn't need protection because his stats versus righties are still really good and he's a switch hitter, as opposed to someone like Kyle Schwarber, who is left-handed with traditional splits and is really going to struggle left on left. Schwarber's still good stats versus left-handed pitching, but this is definitely an area of the lineup that will show a weakness versus a left-handed pitcher. And now we can showcase the more low leverage side of splits. While Wander Franco is better against right-handed pitching and should be protected in some way, it's not as extreme as Schwarber and Trout. Franco only sees around a 10 contact and power drop-off versus lefties, and he's a switch hitter. So although ideally in lineup construction we want to put righties around him or guys who hit left-handed pitching well, it's okay if the guys surrounding him aren't as extreme in terms of crushing lefties. So that's why we have Acuna 5th and Robinson 7th. A situation where your opponent is going to bring in a new pitcher to face your 5-hole hitter leading off the inning, Ronald Acuna Jr. here. They are almost always going to go to a right-handed pitcher and just let Wander Franco hit against the righty, and so it's okay if these splits aren't as drastic. I hope what I'm saying is making sense. I really think having Chipper Jones hitting second makes this lineup so much better, and there are obviously a little bit of niche different ways you could construct a lineup like this, but this is how I'm rolling with it right now, and I'm still every day trying to improve on this system. So that was tip number 3. Take into account who in your lineup has the most drastic splits and go out of your way to protect them as much as possible. And actually our last tip for lineup construction before we move on to bench utilization is kind of a small one, just a little bit of the thing that I like to do, and that is to have speed towards the bottom of your order. So specifically in the 8-hole, you could also go with the 7-hole as well. To go back to my Billy Hamilton example, if I was still using a card like this, I would most definitely bat him 8th in the order. I really like speed in the 8-hole for a couple of reasons. The first reason being that bunting with your pitcher does not always go as planned on this game. In fact, it's usually pretty terrible. In my experience, pitchers laying down bunts is an excruciating process that rarely works out. However, if your 8-hole guy has a lot of speed, you can then have a lot better time trying to steal and bunt at the same time, and this creates a situation where basically the only bad outcome is if you pop up the bunt in the air. If you have a lot of speed in your 8-hole and you try to steal and bunt at the same time and you whiff on the bunt, you still have a decent chance of being safe on the steal. It's a small thing. Pitcher bunting is really terrible in this game, but I find it helps a little bit. The second reason I really like speed towards the bottom of the order is it makes them less likely to want to pitch around you to your pitcher spot, or in general just punishes them harder if they do. Now let's say it's early in the game, you're leading off the inning with your 7-hole hitter Jackie Robinson and he hits a leadoff double. Traditional wisdom would then say to walk the 8-hole hitter to set up the double play and face the pitcher in the next at bat. However, if we have a guy with huge speed like Trey Turner in the 8-hole, this can get really dicey for them really fast. So let's say they walk Trey Turner, that sets up first and second with nobody out and our pitcher spot up. This would then be a situation where I would probably strike out on purpose with my pitcher just to not bunt into a double play. And then as we turn the lineup over, we're looking at a situation where Mike Trout is hitting first in second with 1 out, and if he hits a ball in the gap for a double, then we are most definitely scoring both runs with the speed we have on base. Another situation to think about that may occur is what if you have your 8-hole hitter up with 2 outs and nobody on? If they really just want to get out of the inning and pitch around your 8-hole hitter and get to your pitcher, then speed can help out a bit here, especially in the middle innings where you may be faced with an awkward decision of whether or not to take out your pitcher. So let's say in this situation they walk Trey Turner to set up a runner on first with 2 outs and face your pitcher. You could then see a line of play that involves you stealing second with Trey Turner and then getting a fluky cheap hit with your pitcher to drive him in. This is a run that will score that will not be possible if you have somebody slow in the 8-hole. I'm probably spending way too much time on this concept. It's a really small thing that I just like doing. Definitely a niche thing that you don't have to do to have a really good lineup construction, but I find that it helps more often than it hurts, and I think for traditional speed guys, the 8-hole is much better than leadoff. And so that's our 4 tips for lineup construction. Now let's go on to the most effective way to use your bench, in my opinion. One quick thing to start us off with in terms of bench, make sure you're checking the dynamic of splits with your 8-hole hitter and your leadoff hitter to try to formulate what some likely pinch hits are going to be for you. So if you look at both Trey Turner and Mike Trout, our 8-hole and leadoff respectively, they are both worse versus left-handed pitching in terms of power, and so it may be reasonable for an opponent who is pitching to your 8-hole hitter to start off a late inning to go with a left-handed relief pitcher, because they will be facing Turner and then a pinch hitter and then Trout. So keeping this in mind, it's definitely important to have some lefty crushers on the bench. Most people usually do anyway, but if you keep this in mind, you could actually set yourself up for a high leverage double pinch hit late in the game if you take into account your leadoff hitter. And so this is really going to be the core concept of how I think to use your bench most effectively. It's going to be something that I'm calling leverage based substitutions, and the point of this is to make high leverage pinch hits late in games in big spots to give yourself an advantage when you need it the most. So a dynamic of having Trout hitting leadoff and the way we've constructed our bench is we can actually pinch hit for Trout as well if it's a really big spot really late in the game. Now you may look at my bench and the way it's set up and think, how does anybody on your bench make an effective pinch hit for Mike Trout? And this is where the dynamism comes in, and thinking of tons of scenarios that could happen late in games and how you could possibly use your bench as pinch hitters to help yourself. So let's go back to our example where we have 8-hole hitter Trey Turner, then pinch hitter, and then Mike Trout late in the game, and they bring in a lefty. We stick with Trey Turner, he hits for himself, and then we're left with a pinch hitting decision. Because of the 3-batter minimum, we are then guaranteed to face a left-handed pitcher for our pinch hit, so we're going to want to pick a lefty killer off the bench. And actually, with the way we set it up, it doesn't matter which one we pick, because technically both Salvador Perez and Ozzie Albies could come off the bench for Mike Trout even though they don't play his position, and this is why we have to think critically about all the positions that everyone in our lineup can play. So let's say we pinch hit Salvador Perez for the pitcher, and then Mike Trout gets up and we want to pinch hit again. Can we pinch hit Ozzie Albies for Mike Trout? Yes, we can. After the substitution, defensively will look like this, and we really can just flip-flop Jackie Robinson and Ozzie Albies and be set. What if we went the other direction and we used Albies as our pinch hitter for the pitcher, and now we want to bring in Perez for Trout? Can we do that as well? Yes, we can. Our defensive alignment looks like this after the pinch hit, and we can just flip-flop Schwarber and Salvador Perez like that, and then we're set. So it may seem really obvious when I'm showing you guys step by step in the lineup screen, but this stuff can actually get really intricate in game, and you can often trick your opponents with very clever pinch hits in late game situations that are high leverage substitutions. Now let's look at bringing some of our left-handed hitters off of the bench. The most obvious one would be bringing in Mullins for Acuna against a right-handed pitcher late. That's an easy substitution, but it goes deeper than that because we could actually use Mullins as a pinch hitter for tons of people in this lineup. Another obvious one, we could bring in Mullins for Trey Turner in center field, but what if we wanted to pinch hit Mullins for Jackie Robinson? Could we do that? Yes, we could. Because we have Trey Turner in center field, all we gotta do is flip-flop them after our pinch hit like so. What if we've already burned David Ortiz earlier in the game? Can we substitute Mullins for Castellanos? Yes, we can. Our lineup would look like this. After the pinch hit, we could swap Mullins and Turner, and then swap Turner and Jackie. What if it's just a massive spot and we're facing a righty with 2 outs and bases loaded, and we have Ronald Acuna Jr. at the plate? Could we pinch hit David Ortiz for him? Yes, we can. Ortiz goes to right field, and then we can swap him with Castellanos like so. And I'm sure I'm getting redundant at this point, but I just really want to make clear how many possibilities you have when you use your bench this way. Putting guys on your bench that are capable of coming off and coming up big for you late in games in high leverage situations, and taking into account all the positional versatility of everyone involved and how you can do some really creative stuff with this. And I do want to make it very clear, what I am talking about is not platooning. Platooning would involve taking out someone like Kyle Schwarber for Salvador Perez in the first inning if we faced a left-handed starting pitcher. That is not what we're doing. Everything we're doing involves the mid to late game, because instead of burning that bench bat for a possibly meaningless first inning at bat, we can instead save it for a situation later on that could be much higher leverage. Whew, I hope this is making sense. I think this is easily the most effective way to use your bench, and I don't see very many people doing this. Now, a couple things you may ask yourself, why are you not running a pinch runner off the bench? I find that because cards are so good in Diamond Dynasty, especially at this point of the year and onward, you will very rarely be using a card in your starting lineup that has just game-breakingly slow speed that could actually cost you late. Schwarber is the slowest guy in our lineup at 50 speed, and I don't even think that's bad for a late game situation. When I'm trying to set myself up for good pinch hits late, I think burning a bench slot for a pinch runner is very niche and just generally won't be that effective most of the time. And if you're wondering the purpose of using Escobar as our 5th bench bat, obviously the positional versatility and the switch hitting is huge. He could basically pinch hit for anybody, and also just having a switch hitter with even splits is really good for just like a traditional pinch hit. If I want to make sure I save some of the other 4 guys for some substitutions later on, I may just go to Escobar as my first pinch hitter. So he's kind of just the stable guy there. So I hope everything I'm saying is making sense. I hope you guys are learning some stuff. And with that being said, let's dive into some submitted lineups and benches from you guys, and I'll give my best advice on where to go. You'll also notice that I've switched to dark mode for this point of the video. That is a high level meta play because it satisfies both light mode users and dark mode users who are both going to watch the video and tell me that the other one is terrible. That's supposed to be a joke. And I want to stress as well, there was a ton of feedback on this thread. It has over 85 comments, so if I don't pick your team, I am sorry. And again, we're not going to be telling you which guys to replace in your lineup. We're just going to be talking about how to order them efficiently. I may suggest a couple guys for your bench so you can get a little bit more creative with your high leverage substitutions late, but that'll be about it. All right, this first team is from Stole Jono. I hope I'm saying that right. He does have his cap hitting leadoff. This is very common, and honestly, I think it's one of the best spots for your cap. Again, going back to what I said, I think both power and speed are really good at the leadoff spot, so having a switch hitting cap there obviously makes a lot of sense. As we go down the rest of the lineup, he's got Trey Turner second, then Prince Fielder, Nick Castellanos, Rafael Devers, Xander Bogaerts, Juan Soto, and Salvador Perez. On the bench, he's got Teoscar Hernandez, Byron Buxton, Matt Olson, Jim Thome, and Nelson Cruz. So because we've got 3 right-handed hitting outfielders on the bench, I think it's safe to assume he's platooning Juan Soto in some way, but I do see one pretty glaring flaw in the way this lineup is structured, and even though Juan Soto may be a platoon, I think this is an easy fix. So what I would actually do is I would switch Salvador Perez and Xander Bogaerts. I would have Bogaerts hitting 8th and Perez hitting 6th. Both Rafael Devers and Juan Soto have pretty drastic splits and hit significantly worse versus lefties, and so thinking about the drastic splits that we have, it would make the most sense to have our guy that's maxed out versus lefties, that being Salvador Perez, sandwiched between Devers and Soto to kind of protect both of them. Xander Bogaerts has basically even split, so he doesn't do as good of a job protecting both of those lefty hitters that have really extreme splits. So swap Xander and Perez, that would be my first suggestion. I actually think the way the rest of your lineup is structured is good, and I think you leave a lot to be desired on the bench, to be honest. We've got 3 outfielders and 2 first basemen. Nelson Cruz is actually someone I kind of really dislike having on the bench. I know as a traditional pinch hitter, he's really good, but I really like having guys on the bench that can come off and play the field if I need them to. And so if you want more of a traditional pinch hitter in this Nelson Cruz spot, I would just suggest Eduardo Escobar. That way you have a switch hitter and he can actually play the field if you need him to. Buxton is kind of a weird one as well because he's more defensive centric with even splits. If I had to guess, I would assume that you are platooning Buxton and Soto, and that's why he's on your bench, to have a little bit more defense if he comes in early. I don't know where your collections are at or your programs are at, but somebody like Soriano or Acuna in this spot would be much better. I think Teoscar on the bench is really good. He not only protects Juan Soto, but he also protects Rafael Devers. This is the benefit of having Castellanos in the outfield. You could then slide him to third and put Teoscar in right. And I think in terms of your lefties being Olson and Thome, I think it's fine. You could do a little better in terms of positional versatility, but it's hard with lefties in this game. Olson could play the outfield if you really needed him to, so that opens up a couple doors for you. But overall, solid lineup. My main suggestions would be to swap Perez and Bogaerts in the starting lineup, and then look at replacing Nelson Cruz and Byron Buxton on the bench. This next one's from AA826. I apologize for the picture quality. It's kind of rough, but this is definitely a lineup that could use some readjusting, so I wanted to include it. Our lineup looks like Soriano, then Turner, then Acuna, Schwarber, Franco, Murray, Albies, and Mullins. There's a lot you could be doing with this lineup structure to improve it, my man. Your handedness is kind of smushed together. You've got 3 back-to-back righties, and those are your only righties in the lineup. We've also got 3 back-to-back switch hitters. We could be splitting things up, alternating better, and protecting our guys better. So starting off, if you want to have Soriano and Acuna towards the top of the lineup, I think 1 and 3 is fine, but you need to switch your 2-hole out. I actually think Schwarber batting second would be really strong here because he's protected well by both Soriano and Acuna. But my other suggestion, if you want to keep a lot of speed at the top of the lineup would then be to put Mullins second. So our 1-2-3 should be Soriano, Schwarber, Acuna, or Soriano, Mullins, Acuna. That's going to help us alternate righty-lefty and protect our splits. Moving on from there, in the 4 hole, I would have the other one of either Schwarber or Mullins, and then I would move Ozzie Albies up to 5th to protect that left-handed hitter. So at this point, our lineup should look something like Soriano, Mullins, Acuna, Schwarber, Albies, and then you could kind of just go to town with the last 3. I'd probably go Franco 6th after that since he says pseudo lefty. So my 6, 7, 8 would look something like Franco, Murray, Trey. And so I've actually made your lineup in game to show you what it should look like. I don't have the 99 Murray, so I'm just using the 88 for show, but I think this construction is much better than what you have. We've now got Soriano, then Mullins, Acuna, Schwarber, Albies. That entire 1 through 5 is alternating and protecting different splits. Again, we've got Franco, the pseudo lefty, after Albies, the pseudo righty, and then we finish out with Murray and then Turner in the 8 hole for the speed. Like I mentioned earlier, I like that a lot. Your bench is actually really solid. I don't have any complaints about it, and again, I'm using the 88 Juan Soto for show because I don't have the home run derby one. So I hope that helps you, my man. Let's move on to the next team. Shout out to Showzone for commenting on this as well. I actually am not going to go over this one because it's pretty similar to my squad at the moment, but if you guys haven't checked out Showzone, it's a really cool website, really cool tool. Definitely go give that a look. All right, this next lineup's from Thomas Urban 15. We've got Trey Turner, Wander Franco, Ronald Acuna Jr., Chipper Jones, Nick Castellanos, Kyle Schwarber, Marcus Semien, Mike Trout. On the bench, we've got Salvador Perez, Teoscar Hernandez, Jim Thome, David Ortiz, and Prince Fielder. And so I've recreated your lineup in game here, and I think I'm going to do that for every lineup for the rest of this video. I really like how this looks. And so this is another lineup that has really good players, but we're not protecting guys properly. I like that you're trying to alternate righty-lefty with these switch hitters, so technically you're breaking it up every time if there's a right-handed pitcher on the mound. And I'm assuming Schwarber is so low maybe because of a lack of comfort, and so I'm not going to move Schwarber around at all, but we do need to do a better job of protecting him. Castellanos in front of him is good, but Semien behind him is not as good, only 90 contact versus left. And the problem gets even worse considering we have Trout in the 8 hole who also isn't good against lefties. And so we can see now that the 7 hole with Marcus Semien there is actually one of the biggest weaknesses of this lineup, and we can fix this by either putting Chipper Jones or Ronald Acuna Jr. there. I don't know how you would feel about having Marcus Semien hitting 3rd or 4th, because assuming we swap him with Chipper Jones, this is now how your lineup would look. And so what you could do is actually just swap Castellanos and Schwarber to have Chipper in front of Kyle. That's an easy change. That would be the easiest thing to do, but again, it doesn't help protect Trout that well. And if you wanted my best advice, it would be to keep these core 4 players together, so Jones, Schwarber, Castellanos, and Trout in that order, and then maybe use Acuna after that. So let's try to restructure this a little bit. And so how I would actually think about structuring this lineup would be something like this, keeping that core 4 together, Jones, Schwarber, Castellanos, and Trout, and having them hit 2 through 5 with Acuna on the back end behind Trout, and then rounding out the lineup with Franco and Semien. That's probably how I would go about it. If you are actually platooning Castellanos at first base, this maybe isn't the best structure, because if you do swap him out, you're gonna have back-to-back lefties. So you could just do a swap of Acuna and Castellanos like that, moving Acuna up to 4th, Castellanos down to 6th, and then if you do platoon, now you've got your lefties at 3 and 6, which is really strong. The only reason I'm assuming you're platooning is because you have 3 first basemen on the bench that are left-handed. So if it were me, something like this lineup structure would be ideal. And I do think you're losing a lot of value having 3 lefties that only play first base on your bench. I understand having the traditional left-handed power pinch hitter, but you're losing a lot of value in your lineup and late game substitutions by doing something like this. Also, no switch hitter here, so obviously the easiest change you can make, I've talked about it already, would be to bring in Eduardo Escobar for Jim Thome off the bench. And just rolling with a bench that looks something like this, you could even replace one of Fielder and Ortiz for someone with more positional versatility. An outfielder would be really good here, specifically someone like Mullins. I'm going to bring him up a lot because I think he's one of the best bench bats. If you have Mullins instead of Fielder, now you're actually able to pinch hit for Marcus Semien by doing some shenanigans like this, and that actually gives you 1 additional pinch hit late in the game if you want. Just makes it a little more flexible that way, so I hope that helps. On to the next lineup. All right, this next lineup's from M. Mytinka. I've been doing my best to scroll through all the lineups and try to find some that aren't as as far along, like not just complete God squads. It's kind of tough to find, honestly. Basically, everyone that submitted a lineup has like live series collection done and stuff, but I did think this lineup was pretty interesting. He's got a parallel for Mickey Mantle in left field and is also starting Pablo Sandoval. That's pretty unusual and some pretty drastic splits there, so let's take a look at this lineup. All right, a couple notes about this lineup. I don't actually have the 95 Mantle, so we're putting Ozzy Albies there. Just pretend he's Mantle. They're basically the same at the plate. And then because I'm lazy, I actually haven't finished all the TA2 on this account yet, so I don't have Lou Gehrig either. He did have Lou Gehrig on his bench, so we're just going to pretend Jared Walsh is Lou Gehrig. So I actually really like the setup of these cards and how it's going to blend together. It's going to let us alternate very efficiently. We've got two traditional lefties with pretty extreme splits. We've also got a switch hitter in Pablo Sandoval, who's basically a lefty with extreme splits. And then we've also got Mike Trout, who's basically a lefty with extreme splits. However, we're also rocking with cards that complement them extremely well, especially this Mickey Mantle card I think is huge for the lineup. And so if we just reorder things a bit, I think we can get a really strong lineup alternating all the way down. So assuming that you've kind of ordered these guys in terms of who you're comfortable with the most, we're going to leave Jackie leadoff. However, if we look at the dynamic of Robertson and then Mantle and then Trout, we're kind of going right, left. And so the first thing I want to do is swap Trout and Mantle. Again, I'm sorry, Albies is supposed to be Mantle. I hope this is making sense. So we're going to go Robinson, then Trout, then Mantle. That's going to let us go right, left, right. Essentially, that means for cleanup, we're going to want a lefty. So we go Ortiz and Chipper, swap them there. And then again, after Chipper, we're probably going to want some kind of lefty. So I'm going to swap Acuna and Sandoval like that. So now that we've ordered it this way, we're essentially going right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, all the way down. And we are doing a much better job of protecting our guys with extreme splits. And if you wanted to swap out any of these guys at 2, 4, 6, and 8, so Trout, Ortiz, Sandoval, and Schwarber, if you wanted to put them in any order of 2, 4, 6, 8, I think it's fine. And like I said, I really like how this structure of lineup is working out. And overall, I think your bench is really good. One thing I would think about is maybe replacing Soriano with someone that can play shortstop. Ironically, Ozzy Albies fits this bill really well. The reason I say that is because you do kind of have a traditional platoon with Sandoval and Castellanos, but playing Chipper at short gives you some leverage. You could always slide Chipper back to third base, and that would give you some leverage if you wanted to use Castellanos elsewhere throughout the game. Obviously, just having another lefty killer that plays third base would be just as good as shortstop, like Troy Gloss would be fine, but it's just something cute that I thought of. If you did want to leave Soriano on the bench though, just keep in mind you could still technically pinch hit for Pablo Sandoval with Soriano late. This one's a little bit harder to see, but you could put Soriano at second base and Jackie at third like that, so that's a little bit cute if you don't want to switch your bench up at all. And overall, I think the lineup looks so much better this way. All right, on to the last lineup. I decided I wanted to do 5 of these in the video, so this is going to be the last one. And our last lineup is going to be from DW Heroes. I like this lineup. I finally found one that's not necessarily a God squad. A couple of lower tier players in here. He's got Dominguez, then Soriano, Olsen, Castellanos, Mauricio, Buxton, Posada, and Cronenworth. And so here is your lineup in game. I don't have Future Stars Dominguez on this account, so we'll just use the prospect one for show. And I picked out this lineup specifically because I think it has one glaring weakness in the way it's structured, and we can have a lot better lineup if we go ahead and fix that. And that is having Jake Cronenworth in the 8 hole. He's one of only 2 lefties in your lineup, and on top of that, he's extremely weak versus left-handed pitching comparatively. And so we need to structure our lineup in a way that protects him a little bit better, and we need to structure our bench in a way that can help offset this weakness late in games if we have to. Having Cronenworth hitting 8 is not protecting him well enough. I'm not entirely sure if you're platooning Cronenworth and Trey Turner. If you are platooning them, then it's actually infinitely better to just start Trey Turner over Cronenworth, and that actually gives you way more flexibility with your pinch hits later on. But for the sake of this lineup, let's pretend like Cronenworth is your surefire starter no matter what. We need to rearrange the order for him. And so what I would actually suggest is moving Cronenworth up to 5th and replacing Mauricio there. This protects Cronenworth much better, being sandwiched between Castellanos and Buxton. Also, double switch hitter to finish out the lineup is decently strong. It makes your opponent's bullpen decisions a little bit tough, even though both guys are worse against lefties. And in terms of your bench, I would definitely look to add somebody that can offset Cronenworth late in the game. As it stands right now with your bench the way it is, you can obviously bring in Turner for Cronenworth like we talked about earlier, but basically the only way to offset Cronenworth hitting versus a lefty late in the game would be to move Fox to third base off the bench and then Castellanos to left and then Soriano to second base. Pretty hard to see that one. And so I would actually advise taking live series Ronald Acuna Acuna Jr., and again replacing him with someone like Albies that can just help offset that weakness late in games. Wow, that was a long video. That was a ton of work. I hope it was helpful for you guys. This is easily the most in-depth I've ever gone on this concept, so if you made it all the way to the end, you're a real one. Let me know if you have any questions down in the comment section below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Would love to hear you guys' feedback on this one as well. It was a lot of work and it's the first time I've tried to do something like this. Anyways, thanks for watching. Thanks for all your support this year. Take care and I'll see you all next time.